Season's greetings. The recent furore over the Intel Arc P580 has gotten me interested in building a cheap PC around it. Trouble is, it seems the last couple generations of Intel CPUs have issues. I would like to have an all-Intel living room box, but with recent compatibility and performance problems, I fear I may end up creating a platinum product instead, fusing an AMD CPU with an Intel GPU, something which I wouldn't have thought conceivable even 5 years ago.
Right.
What are your thoughts on the appropriate parts to pair with an Intel Arc if building a budget PC from scratch? Cheers! Exclamation point. What do you think about this, Alex? I've got some thoughts about this, but I think when it comes to budget CPUs, there isn't really much to worry about whether you're Intel or AMD. It's just about as much performance as you can get for the cheapest price point, really.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, I would say that to get it cheaper and to get it like mini, I actually do want to say AMD might be in the advantage there, just because you could get it cheaper with DDR4 on an AM4 board. Presumably it has enough. It should be fine PCIe wise for ARC. That should all be good. I think I would just tend to want to go over to AMD for a smaller thing, just because the access to motherboards might be different. It's very popular at the moment. A lot of people are building these things, so there's a lot of written reviews online about various niche products that to get like a smaller, cheaper box. I had used them myself when I was building a PC for someone most recently. A lot of guides basically saying like the clearance of certain things for a smaller PC. Very important to know when you buy all these disparate products that are not necessarily tested together, right? That's the one thing about PC that is always out there. So I am almost saying like the platypus design, it's a real thing in nature. Evolution produced it, so it's got to be good.
Oliver, you've actually had an Intel CPU, one of the contentious ones. Have you had any issues with it?
Not yet, although I have installed the updates, and also I've reduced the wattage to 160 watts in that CPU. Right. Just out of an abundance of caution, at least if I'm doing a benchmark on it, obviously I remove that, but if I'm just doing my normal day-to-day work, I want it to consume a little bit less power, not just for the stability issues, but also because I have a liquid cooler on there, but it can get pretty toasty at 250 watts even, because that's a lot of wattage for a processor. But yeah, I would agree. I think the AMD CPUs are where I would like to be at the moment, especially with Zen 5. I think it's a very good architecture, very power efficient architecture, very compelling certainly for a PC build of most kinds there. But I think on the CPU side, it definitely comes down to cost. On the GPU side, to me, it kind of seems like there's this question of, do I go with an ARC card potentially, like a B580, that is a relatively cheap card? Maybe has some questions around drivers and things like that may pose an issue potentially in the future, or may be okay in the future. You're kind of rolling the dice a bit on that. Or an AMD or NVIDIA card, obviously, that has less of those questions, but definitely costs more money for similar performance. So I think there are some questions there. Hard to answer. Depends on your own proclivities, depends on what games you like to play, depends on a lot of those things. But I could totally see an AMD Intel GPU build being the most sensible option for a lot of people who are in this position at the moment.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think on the budget side of things, there's a lot of good options from both Intel and AMD. Obviously, you'd be on an older platform with Intel for budget builds, but you would be for AMD as well. Right. On the Intel side, anything from 12400 in brackets F, to 14400. Those are all really good chips, 6 cores, 12 threads, lots of gaming performance there. On the AMD side, you've got the 5600, the 5600X. I mean, I got a 5600X from AliExpress for like £60, which is like nutso value. You are obviously running a DDR4 based platform, but budget-wise, I think that's absolutely fine, especially for a GPU like the B580. That's perfectly fine. You're still going to be CPU limited in some games, but ultimately you've got a pretty good balance there. I'm perfectly fine with Intel or AMD. I think it's basically just look at the gaming performance of the likes of the 12400, 13400, 14400 against the 5600 or whatever else that you can get in the really cheapo price bracket. The problems with Intel are basically because, seemingly because of a huge amount of voltage that's being pumped into the CPU. And on processors in the budget range, they're typically capped at 65 watts. So I don't think the stability issues are actually going to be too much of an issue there. I take on board what Oliver's saying, though, about which GPU you'd want to use. The thing that ARC has done is basically to solve the biggest problem that all the GPUs in that price range have, which is that they don't have enough VRAM for future games. That's what it's done. But, you know, secondhand 3060 is worth considering if it's a really cheap price point.
Same, yeah, it's a good one too.
It's got the DLSS. I'm still curious, and I still haven't really looked into this as to whether there is some form of DLSS wrapper for XESS, so you can actually tap into the compatibility. So tap into using DLSS where the compatibility isn't there for XESS. I'd still like to check that out. I don't know whether there is such a thing or not, but conceivably it should be possible. Just have to wait and see there. I have to look into that.